everybody, welcome back. I am proud and happy to be talking with the International Chair of Democrats Abroad today, Candice Kerestan. Candice, hello.
Hey, Allison, how's it going?
It's going really well, and I'm so very excited to talk to you today because I've been keeping my eye on our Democrats Abroad numbers. You know, it really didn't start to come into my periphery until about 2018 when we were trying to figure out if we were going to have the blue tsunami that we ended up having. And then, of course, in 2020, when we were all like, please, we need to end this nightmare. And the numbers that have been coming from voters, from Democrats abroad, have just been astounding, like explosive at the increasing rate of Democrats abroad being involved. And I was wondering if you could tell me why you think that is, if it has something to do with the international perception of what's going on in politics in the United States with, Trump and then Biden taking over and Roe being overturned. I mean, there's got to be a lot that really gets Democrats abroad more involved than, say, in like 2012.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The events of the past few years have really energized Democrats living both at home and abroad. And maybe just as a starting point to say a few words about our organization in general. So we are the official arm of the Democratic Party. We count as a state party, so just like the 50 states and territories. We have a home within the Democratic Party, and we're very grateful for that. And as you mentioned, there are quite a few Americans living overseas. There are an estimated 9 million of us in total. So that's really a force to be reckoned with. And our organization and my job, which I love and really feel the impact of, is to make sure that we're finding each and every one of those Americans and getting them voting. And to go back to your question directly, about this increased engagement, there's been a lot of things over the past few years that have been very difficult to watch as an American overseas. Everyone who's living abroad didn't just up and leave the United States. We all have a very special connection to the country that we were born in or naturalized in or have a parent from, right? And there's a whole perspective, again, from these experiences that Americans abroad have. And so looking back in, when you see something like repeated massacres happening in elementary schools, or you see women being stripped of the right to determine, their rights over their body. And again, especially my perspective living in Germany, for example, where we do have access to healthcare, access to affordable education, gun safety laws. It's an emotional connection back to the United States to think, why can't we be doing better? And the Democratic Party, again, is taking up these issues. And it's really energized a lot of people to come to Democrats abroad and channel their activism and concern for the United States.
Yeah, and it's been a lot. I mean, I remember somebody saying, well, what are you going to do now that Biden's been elected? I mean, there's not going to be this crazy news cycle. And I'm like, oh, I think you might be wrong, because it's residual. We didn't just get rid of the entire problem when we voted in 2020. There's the problem, first of all, that he's still out and about running around and possibly running for president again. He's got a ton of followers who still follow him. He's got a bunch of people in the Republican Party who are still kowtowing to him. And then, we have all these criminal investigations that are now coming to light. But the residual impact of the Supreme Court is going to be around with us for decades and decades. And so that's why I think Democrats abroad is such an important arm of the Democratic Party. I mean, like 9 million strong. That's just that's a margin of like how we, of what the victory was in 2020. That's a massive amount of votes. And I imagine, and maybe I've got it in my head, maybe I'm biased that I think people who travel or are more worldly tend to vote Democrat. But I don't know what the breakdown is of expats that are Democrats versus that would vote Republican. I feel like Republicans abroad probably isn't a thing.
Yeah, so we do find that the overwhelming majority of Americans living outside of the United States are voting for Democrats. And again, I think it goes back to what we just discussed. A lot of us are living in societies, again, that have prioritized things like, the list goes on, gun safety laws, access to healthcare, access to education, where you're not going broke for either of those things. And again, those are issues that the Democratic Party is really taking up and championing. They're really taking up within the United States. And again, I say this as a younger voter too. When I look at politics back home, I'm from Pennsylvania, there's only one party who I could ever imagine myself identifying with, and one party that I feel is taking those issues seriously.
And what about, because I know that there's a huge military contingent abroad, like voters who aren't in the United States. I feel like that's, to me, seems like a different category because they're there on orders, That's not something like they decided to, to do for themselves, to make a move for themselves. But I also was wondering, because when I was in the military, what I noticed is those of us who did travel a lot tended to kind of vote more Democratic. And I noticed that in a lot of Marines that, you would think would be like gung-ho Republicans. But after spending time, with a translator in Afghanistan or, in Germany, seeing their healthcare system at work, it just seemed like most of them, to me, were pretty liberal people.
Yeah, so as active military, they are bound to remaining neutral. So we don't see large public amounts of engagement from military. I will say, again, based on my experience with a lot of the veteran communities that we have here, again, as you mentioned, their life experiences have really given them a different perspective, kind of from the outside looking in, that, again, as someone who has served their country, right, they feel like this perspective is worth transporting back. They feel like it's worth their engagement, like they should make that and their perspective be a part of the process.
And do U.S. voters abroad vote at similar rates as people in the United States? Because we don't have a very good voter turnout here in the United States.
I would say we're working on it. So voter turnout was about 8% in 2020. So we are working every single day around the clock to make sure that more Americans abroad are voting. As I mentioned, and as you mentioned, we're really a force to be reckoned with. The votes from abroad in 2020 delivered the margin of victory for Joe Biden in not only Arizona, but in Georgia as well. So had Americans abroad not shown up as much as they did, we could be looking at a very different landscape in the United States. We could be looking at Trump in the White House. And so from my position and our team organizing all around the world, our mind is, how can we up that 8%? How many more races can we be winning and delivering the votes again to move our country in the right direction?
Yeah, and 8% is actually quite a bit more than it was in just a decade earlier.
Exactly.
So we do see that engagement. How can people listening to this program, people listening to the Daily Beans, help you get those voters engaged?
I think the biggest thing that anyone listening could do is just to make a list of people they know who are living abroad. Or, maybe that is someone in the military. Maybe that is someone in your family who's studying abroad this coming semester. It really comes down to us connecting with people in our own networks. A lot of what we do is word of mouth. And so I would encourage everyone, again, to think about who they know and to direct them to votefromabroad.org. That's where Americans residing overseas can request their absentee ballot. We vote by mail, just like a lot of folks in the US are doing. So again, please direct anyone and everyone you know who's overseas to get their ballot at votefromabroad.org.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Again, that's votefromabroad.org. And I've been talking to the International Chair of Democrats Abroad, Candice Kerestan. Thank you so much for taking time today to talk to me.
Thanks, Allison. Appreciate it.
Everybody stick around. We'll be right back with the good news.